Um, the Hezbollah issue is really tricky. So I had a great conversation with Yaakov earlier today. First time we speak from the Jerusalem Post, and the
Yaakov
Yaakov
Katz?
Katz, yeah. And no, he was actually really good at explaining things because I struggled to understand how Israel could have people like Smotrich, Katz, and Ben Gvir in their government making such statements. And you don't see that in any other country in the civilized world. And just trying to understand really how Israelis see what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening in. We didn't talk about Palestine because that's a whole other episode by itself, but mainly focused on Lebanon and Iran. And he started to explain to me the Hezbollah situation. Hezbollah does act, and the reason I'm not a fan of Hezbollah, I understand reality. Also, Lebanese government has voted to disarm Hezbollah. I understand the reality. There's also a fact that there is no state that could really flourish when it has a state within a state. Now, the counter argument to that is there should be a deterrent for Israeli aggression, and the Lebanese military is too weak, which is a very valid point as well. The Lebanese military needs to be empowered and needs to be armed. And then there's the chicken and egg problem. If we disarm Hezbollah, do you really trust Israeli intent, especially when you see them level villages in southern Lebanon? And the Israelis are like, if we pull out of southern Lebanon, and there's a new resolution for Hezbollah to pull out of southern Lebanon as well, to have a buffer zone where the Lebanese could go back home, despite what stupid Katz is saying. The Lebanese people can go back home, but Hezbollah does not return to Israel's border. Israel does see Hezbollah as a threat, and rightly so. And then, so what people in Israel say, Mario, how do we know this resolution won't be applied? Because last time we trusted it to be applied, Hezbollah did return to the south. So my question to you is, what is a logical solution to that problem there? Because again, I don't think disarming Hezbollah is a solution in the short term. Iran would not allow that to happen. So then, what is another option? How do you achieve what the Israelis want for their own security, but what the Lebanese want by getting their land back, and what Iran want, which is keeping Hezbollah?
Well, that's a Zionist solution. I mean, it's not a legitimate solution. The legitimate solution is that Israel should be disarmed. The IDF should be disarmed. They're the aggressor in the region. The United States should suspend weapons to Israel and then begin a process of peace and reconciliation where the ethno-supremacist apartheid system is peacefully dismantled. That's the solution. Why? We're just not allowed to talk about it. You get called an anti-Semite if you talk about it. The solution isn't to ethnically cleanse the Lebanese population, to disarm those who are defending themselves against a country that has invaded them again and again and again. And this whole proposal, by the way, was cooked up by the US, by the Pentagon and the CIA and Saudi Arabia to push Lebanon into civil war once again. There's just no force internally that can do it. The Lebanese army's basically a neo-colonial joke that was set up by the United States to not defend Lebanon's borders against the main force that's constantly invading it, the United States. And it looks as if Joseph Aoun has greenlit some Israeli assassinations of Lebanese army commanders because they weren't interested in going to war with fellow Lebanese citizens who happen to be Shia living in the south. So I'm not going to go along with some, Zionist solution about how we can guarantee the security of an ethno-supremacist state that is illegally occupying 70% of the Gaza Strip, most of the occupied West Bank, the Golan Heights, and then is responsible for genocide in which over 20,000 children have been killed since October 7th. Which is continuing to push an 8-front war in which the 8th front is the United States. And according to the Defense Intelligence Agency of the Pentagon, Israeli spying on American officials and Americans is now at a critical level. I'm supposed to be concerned for their security? Yeah. No, I'm concerned for the security of the 1 million people who have been ethnically cleansed in southern Lebanon, who can't go back to their homes, whose homes are being destroyed. Hezbollah is not going into Israel and blowing up entire villages with D9 operators getting paid per house that they destroy. That's what Israel's doing. It's doing it in broad daylight. It's proud of the fact that last night it massacred 50 civilians. It's proud of the triple and quadruple tap strikes it wages on first responders in southern Lebanon because it puts them on the IDF's X account. It's proud of that. Hezbollah's not doing that. They're showing footage of them hitting Israeli soldiers. How many Israeli civilians have been killed versus Israeli soldiers? How many Lebanese civilians have been killed? Close to 4,000 since Israel began this assault after violating the ceasefire over 1,000 times. Between November 2024 and March of this year, Hezbollah wasn't violating the ceasefire. Israel was. Israel's violating the ceasefire in Gaza every day. Every day. They don't care about a ceasefire. Their presence in Lebanon is now a violation of the MOU. So let's talk first about the security of Lebanese people, and there won't need to be a Hezbollah or an IRGC ballistic missile program or Iran having nuclear breakout capacity if you don't have this nuclearized ethno-supremacist state existing along apartheid lines. So let's start that discussion, and let's also just consider what happened to. Let's put yourself in Joseph Aoun's shoes, as if this guy has some real popular mandate, as if the Lebanese public wants to normalize with Israel, like poll the Lebanese public on normalization with Israel, including the Sunni public. They're not down with that. What would happen to Joseph Aoun if he resisted this whole program of, assaulting and ethnically cleansing the Shia community and disarming Hezbollah with some imaginary force? Consider what happened to Saad Hariri in 2017 when Mohammed bin Salman got worried that Hariri didn't want to confront Iran. He wasn't interested in this confrontation that Aoun is playing out right now. They brought him to Saudi Arabia and they basically tortured him like Suge Knight hung Vanilla Ice over a balcony by his ankles. It was like that. And they humiliated him on national TV and then sent him back. And they were like, "You're our bitch." So the idea that Hezbollah is this Iranian force that doesn't represent anything and is a state within a state, and then the government in Beirut, the authorities, that they're not controlled by some outside force, is a complete fantasy. Joseph Aoun's mandate is not to the Lebanese public, it's to Saudi Arabia and the CIA. And same with Nawaf Salam. That guy doesn't even have a party, the prime minister. Who is he? He has like, what constituent base does he have? He was at the ICJ, basically doing nothing about Israel's genocide charges. And then suddenly he's just shifted into this position as Lebanese PM. He's a technocrat. So let's stop operating along, let's not have to, we don't have to view the world through the lens of Israeli defense establishment stenographer Yaakov Katz. Let's look at it through the perspective of the people on the front lines of this war of ethnic cleansing and give them security first.
So I don't disagree with you. So that's my stance after I saw the villages being leveled in southern Lebanon. I'm like, asking Hezbollah to disarm when Israel's committing what it's committing in southern Lebanon is no longer a logical solution because there's no more deterrent against what seems to be a lot more sinister ambitions on the Israeli side. Leveling villages is not getting rid of Hezbollah. So that's the argument I was making earlier today. Just to understand your position, if Israel pulls out of South Lebanon and Hezbollah pulls out of South Lebanon and there's a ceasefire and South Lebanon will have no Hezbollah presence whatsoever, do you think that's a pragmatic step forward for peace in the region or between those two countries?
That's the thing. Israel will not pull out unless there is a massive Hezbollah presence because the apartheid state of Israel only understands force. We have to look at the West Bank as an example. 2005 through 2007, Israel was engaged in this process of sort of mopping up the Second Intifada, which guaranteed Palestinians control over the Gaza Strip without settler presence. And they gained that through force. And that was how they got the Israeli settlers out of the Gaza Strip. Hamas did it. Fatah, they did have the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade participating on some level in the Second Intifada, and it's much harder for them to, it was much harder to wage a kind of guerrilla campaign in the West Bank because of the deeply embedded presence of Israeli military bases and settlements, the terrain, etc. But by 2007, there was this sort of Dayton plan, General Keith Dayton counterinsurgency plan. The final iterations of Palestinian resistance were destroyed in the Balata refugee camp in Nablus by the Palestinian Authority, The Palestinian Authority's security forces, trained by Keith Dayton and DynCorp, this mercenary firm, and Tony Blair was hanging out at the American Colony Hotel, milking the so-called peace process. And Mahmoud Abbas comes in and promises some kind of like economic peace with Israel, and he gets what I would call like the golden occupation, or the 5-star occupation. He gets Ramallah and Area A, these cities in the West Bank, where it feels like you're in the Arab world, and you don't usually have Israeli soldiers all the time. But once you get out of there, you're surrounded by, for example, this massive Kalandia checkpoint. There are settlements continue to expand. Israel deepens its control over the West Bank, steals all the water in the Jordan Valley. And if Palestinians resist or throw rocks, they are arrested, they are tortured, they are shot if they do anything more. And the Palestinian Authority has to arrest Palestinians during the day, and then the IDF comes at night and does, breaks down doors and arrests children in their beds in villages like Nabi Salah or Bilin or Nalin, which tried to attempt an unarmed resistance against the apartheid wall, which cut deep into the West Bank. This giant wall. It wasn't built along the 67 borders. That's what. So why am I giving you this whole history and telling you, what I've personally witnessed in the West Bank? That's what will happen to southern Lebanon if there is no Hezbollah. That's what will happen if Joseph Aoun's plan goes forward, which is basically the Israeli and U.S. plan for Lebanon. That's what will happen with normalization, and that Shia population of Lebanon, which has elected the largest parliamentary bloc in Lebanon, will start to become homeless, and they will become permanently ethnically cleansed. And so it's up to this so-called international community, which allowed the Holocaust of our time to just occur in Gaza. It's up to them to try to prevent that, and they won't do it. That's why Hezbollah exists. Someone has to step into the breach and control this monster in Tel Aviv. So that's my point. No Hezbollah. The South Lebanon becomes de facto the West Bank. No Assad in Syria, who with his allies in the IRGC and so on. Look at what happened to the Golan in Syria under Jolani, aka al-Shara. Israel's just there. They're skiing on Mount Hermon, the highest point in Syria.
Yeah. Now, I'm very critical of Israeli foreign policy in Syria, and that was a question I asked Katz earlier today, the journalist. And he agreed. He said, Mario, our policy should be to give Syria a chance to pull out of Syria and try to improve relations with al-Shara. So that was his position. So I think we'd all agree that's the right position with Syria. And with Lebanon, I agree with you. I'm just saying the solution, there has to be a pragmatic solution. When you say something like disarming the state of Israel, actually, I'll ask you the question. One of my guests asked me the question, so I'll ask you the same question. What do you think? Hold on. FDD CEO asked you that question. Dubowitz. What do you think would happen to Israel if it is disarmed right now?
Well, it depends on how it's done. I mean, first of all, why don't we have a global summit on Israel's nuclear program and a national campaign against a nuclear Israel? Why was there a massive campaign against a nuclear Iran?
Yeah, I agree.
Obviously run by Israel's cutouts in the U.S., like this guy, Jason Brodsky, who's just like an Israeli operative posing as like this American guy. Why? Iran didn't even have a active nuclear program, but we can't talk about Israel's nuclear weapons when it's just when clearly it's the one that can't be trusted with nuclear weapons. Was anyone fearing over the last several months that Iran was going to deploy, for example, a tactical nuclear weapon, or had done so? No,
everyone I asked in my show, exactly. Everyone on my show, I would ask them that question throughout the war. The most common answer, the people that were worried about Israel deploying a nuke on Iran. But that's also because Iran did not have a nuke. So let's just be fair here.
So it's not my job, in my position, it never has been. I defined my job for myself, which was to put forward ideas that I thought were logical and sane and moral and ethical, that might not align with the current consensus, which accepts genocide, which accepts occupation, which accepts permanent war and profits from it, and accepts insider trading on war. I'm putting forward a different idea that might, infuriate Zionists right now and seem insane, but it's the same idea that led to the dismantlement of South African apartheid, which, I had some serious problems about how that was done, including by the African National Congress, but it led to that. These are the same ideas that influenced the dismantlement of the English occupation, the British occupation of Northern Ireland, and a kind of cold peace in Northern Ireland. And we have to put forward these ideas because this is the only way out of this crisis, which is one of the central crises afflicting humanity, and not operate along the cold, dead, zombified logic. I would say poisonous, toxic, cancerous logic of Zionism, which is put forward by pretty much everyone aligned with Israel. And, I've been putting forward these concepts ever since I started speaking out about this issue in 2009. It got me run out of a lot of jobs in journalism and, led to me to kind of go independent with the gray zone. And obviously these ideas are falling on fertile soil because we're pretty popular at the gray zone in a lot of those places that ran me out, like the Nation magazine, for example. Who even reads that anymore?
Yeah, I never heard of it. But just, I want to ask you, but isn't there other solutions away from that extreme? The status quo is unacceptable. Things in the region, the way Israel conducts its foreign policy, I'm staunchly against. The other extreme of disarming Israel, I find it also to be just not practical. Wouldn't there be a middle ground where, for example, the US, as we're seeing right now, hopefully action follows, the US and the international community genuinely start to pressure Israel? Because when you remove that kind of bubble of impunity that we've offered Israel, then Israel has to find a different solution to Iran, to Hezbollah, to Syria, rather than trying to deal with everything through military force.
Well, Israel's not going to disarm. Look at Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister, who said we have to kill thousands of Lebanese mothers for every Israeli soldier killed. That's the linchpin of Netanyahu's coalition. And he's going to be in New York. He's going to be in New York on July 7th for a United Nations conference called, I think, Investing in Peace or Enforcing Peace. And it's a conference of police chiefs.
Ben-Gvir.
Okay? Ben-Gvir will. And, he needs to be held accountable for that. He's personally responsible for the torture and murder and rape of thousands of Palestinian prisoners. He recently put himself on video torturing and abusing humanitarian flotilla activists who are the heroes of our time. He's proud of torture. He's a torture fetishist, and he is the Nazi of the 21st century, and he's coming to New York. He represents the id. He's sort of he's like the soul of the Israeli government right now. He's like their true spokesman, and his party Otzma Yehudit, they're gaining a lot of popularity among Jewish Israeli youth. So yeah, they're not going to give up their weapons. They're not going to end the genocide in Gaza if we keep giving them tons of aid. I think there's a nice way to go about it, where the United States, we start electing leadership that will just end all aid to Israel until they start to act like human beings instead of barbarian child killers and torture fetishists and rapists by canine proxy. But there's a nice way to do that, and we should support those kinds of leaders, and we should not vote for those who propose giving 1 penny, even though I guess the Fed, the Treasury isn't printing pennies anymore. So 1 nickel to Israel. And, when we talk about responsibility to protect, this doctrine that the United States used, for example, to destroy Yugoslavia, it was enacted to bomb Syria, including on the basis of obvious deceptions like the one in Duma. We always hear about it. It's just basically a ruse to attack countries that are official enemies. We have a responsibility to protect the Palestinians with military force. if Israel continues with this genocidal policy in which they've now established cranes and towers to fire into the tents of people whose homes were bombed in the Gaza Strip. A journalist from Gaza just sent me some photos and video of a tournament he just filmed. His name is Mohammed El Saif, great journalist on the ground, of girl amputees, 12-year-old girls who are amputees who are having a sports tournament of amputees. That's the reality that these people live in. They are the Holocaust victims of our time, and we have a responsibility to protect them. And we need to support candidates in the United States who also would be willing to use the U.S. military to protect that population. That's something that might seem absurd, but there was actually proposals similar to that put forward by the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, at the UN last year to intervene on behalf of the genocide victims in Gaza. There was just no force willing to do it. But that doesn't mean we can't change the politics here and actually elect candidates that are willing to do that if Israel refuses to disarm its Holocaust regime. It might not be now, but people might look at this interview in 50 years and say, well, yeah, he called it.
The last thing I want to ask you, and I wanted to ask you this early on, glad I didn't forget. There's something that, so Tucker, in the last week alone, Tucker mentioned it to me, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Joe Kent all talked about or mentioned they were concerned about the president possibly being under duress. And they all linked it to, I asked them the question, especially Marjorie, when she started seeing that shift, and they all pointed to Butler, the assassination attempt. I've never asked you that question. I've never heard you talk about it. Do you think there could be any truth to it, that there could be, the president could feel threatened, whether himself, his family, whether to his life, or something less sinister, maybe legal threats, economic threats, or just political threats? Is that a possibility on what's guiding his decisions? Because the Iran war is just such a stupid war. You were talking earlier how the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranians succeeded with the Strait of Hormuz with their underground missile facilities. But everyone knew that. Everyone knew about their missile facilities deep underground. With U.S. intelligence, I'm sure they knew how deep it was. Everyone knew Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz. They could easily strike Gulf infrastructure. So it's not, you didn't need to be an intelligence analyst to come to these conclusions. So then it begs the question, why the hell did Trump do this? That's why I've been giving that theory a lot more thought recently.
Well, I have talked about this a lot, and I've written about it a lot. And if anyone's interested, the Gray Zone, or under my byline, I published a investigation called "How Israel and the FBI Manipulated Assassination Plots to Goad Trump into Iran War." And this was published on March 6th, so anyone can look it up.
Can you retweet it if there's a tweet about it, and I'll retweet it as well so people could easily spot it?
Yeah, I'll just send it to you in the chat.
On WhatsApp. Yeah, send it to me on WhatsApp if you can. And I'll just retweet it for the audience.
All right. Just looking you up real quick. All right, here it is. So, yeah, I mean, this was an investigation I did into the case of someone named Asif Merchant. And there are several other cases, but basically into all of these supposed terrorism cases, which were spun as Iranian assassination attempts against Donald Trump directed by the IRGC. And remember, on February 28th, 2026, when Donald Trump launched Operation, quote unquote, Epic Fury, he assassinated Iran's Ayatollah, Ali Khamenei. He said, "I got him before he got me." Trump was like really excited about this. It was because he was told by the Israelis that the Israelis did this. And then Hegseth went out and said, "We also killed an IRGC operative who had directed several attempts against Donald Trump." And what was that based on? What was that comment based on? It was based on several plots that never would have reached their conclusion, which were never serious, which were always being monitored by FBI undercover operatives, informants, in many ways guided by the FBI. And And prior to that, which were being directed by Israeli intelligence, specifically this plot of this Pakistani national named Asif Merchant, who was just sentenced or was just convicted of a very nebulous assassination plot, which Trump was told were Iranian plots against him. And it got to the point where during Donald Trump's campaign for president, he was flying on a ghost plane to campaign stops, and he'd basically send his staff on Trump Force One, and he was riding on Steve Witkoff's private jet because he was told completely falsely, based on the shadiest information, that IRGC operatives were in the United States and were planning to take Donald Trump out with anti-aircraft weapons. This was fake. It was basically fake, and Trump was being manipulated. But there were real plots. I mean, there were real assassination attempts on Donald Trump, more real than attempts on any president since Ronald Reagan, since John Hinckley shot Ronald Reagan. And these are weird attempts, like Butler. It was weird. Everybody just can feel that it was unusual that this unknown man who we were initially told had no online footprint. Thomas Matthew Crooks was able to scale a roof after testing a drone at the Butler Fairgrounds and then fire several shots before a heroic local cop shot him as the Secret Service basically froze. And then no one was, there weren't like immediate firings at the Secret Service, and he nicked Trump's ear, according to the official account. There was the Ryan Routh, he was able to get close to Mar-a-Lago with a rifle. This guy who has this shady background of training American and foreign volunteers for the international battalion in Ukraine. And then the assassination of Charlie Kirk clearly shook Donald Trump. But with the Butler plot, there's no clear evidence pointing to Iran at all. But that didn't bother Mike Waltz. Mike Waltz was at the time a member of Congress, was very pro-Trump, was in sort of Trump's bullpen in Congress, and was someone whose career had been cultivated by the Israel lobby. He's one of the largest recipients in the House of Representatives of AIPAC money. AIPAC, helped recruit him. And, after Congress, he went into the Trump administration. He was initially NSC director until Signalgate on Yemen. Now he's the UN ambassador. But he was on the committee to investigate Butler, and he kept trying to guide the committee into this weird rabbit hole in which Butler was actually an Iranian plot. It's so strange. Now, what if Butler had succeeded and Trump had actually been assassinated on that day, and Mike Waltz was pushing this Iran narrative? And who was standing next in line in the Republican Party? It was Nikki Haley, who was one of the biggest Iran hawks and neocon fanatics in the Republican Party today. And she would have potentially filled Donald Trump's shoes as the nominee and launched a war on Iran right then, blaming Iran for killing Donald Trump. I mean, that was a possibility. There's a great book right now by Ken Silva.
He was on I was chatting to him a few days ago. He knows so much about the damn assassination. He knows the weather, the temperature at the time. But yeah, he's got an incredible book.
He's the expert, and he's also not like a conspiracy theorist. He's a conspiracy analyst, or he only deals with conspiracy facts. So he's actually poured cold water on some of the sillier assassination conspiracy theories. A very serious reporter and analyst. And, I consulted him on my investigation. But the overall point I'm making is that there's clear evidence, there's a clear record of Trump being placed under duress through real assassination plots where they've been spun into an imaginary Iranian plot to or a more dubious Iranian plan to avenge the death of Qasem Soleimani by killing Donald Trump. And Trump believed that up until February 28th. I don't know what he believes now, or if he believes that Israel will seek to eliminate him, but I do know from several sources who've talked to Donald Trump and been around him that he's not fond of Netanyahu and that he's very wary of Netanyahu and that he feels a deep sense of unease and is aware of the ability of these Israel-directed forces to harm him. But when I say harm him, I mean, it's more like he fear that they could harm him politically, or Miriam Adelson could pull the plug on Trump's financial feeding tube. There are many areas of leverage that they have short of actually physically harming Trump.
Yeah, well, her publication, Israel Hayom, put out a piece calling him, I think they called Trump a traitor today. And an article in an op-ed.
Yeah, I mean, and assassinations in their wheelhouse. I mean, they have an entire division of the Mossad dedicated to assassination, and that's why I think many people believe that Charlie Kirk was assassinated by Israel, even though I've found no evidence of that. And
I'm not convinced.
Deny it twice. I was reading another piece in the Jerusalem Post in which they sort of imagined Joseph Aoun, the president of Lebanon, being assassinated by Hezbollah, but and then that would sort of, and they said, if that happens, then the U.S. will have to go back to war with Iran. So, that would make me get conspiratorial a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't expect Israel to kill Joseph Aoun or the Americans. And by the way, I support what he's trying to do. But always skeptical, but I support it. But anyway, if when I see a story like this, I don't disagree with your skepticism. Max, welcome back. Don't leave us for too long again. It's good to chat to you again. Give us your overview on things. Love the analysis. And I'd love to do this again soon. I appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot, Mario.